Now moving into what you could probably call constructivism, where knowledge is constructed into individual conclusions about ill-structured problems. So not only is knowledge uncertain for these folks, they recognize that problems can't be, the most significant problems cannot be stated in a way that allows for a certain conclusion, for a positive certain conclusion. But the important thing here is that we're taking information from a variety of sources, and we have interpretations based on evaluation of evidence across contexts. So we've got multiple contexts bearing on the same problem, which is what we're trying to do here, and on the evaluated opinion of reputable others. Right? So what Will was referring to there, my experience counts for something, and if your conception of knowledge doesn't value experience, then we're very much talking different languages here. There's something deeper to be sorted out.
And so another way of maybe putting, would it be correct to say that ill-structured problems, it's about the questions we formulate.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have the capacity to really formulate questions that may be able to unpack a whole lot of other complexity, we're going to be really going down the wrong.
Yeah. No, it's worse than that.
Oh,
it's
really?
that if we're looking at a situation which is at all interesting, I mean, I'll go back to executive coaching. If you've got a complex organization, there is no good answer to the question, what do we do next? Because it's always going to be a trade-off among at least 5 or 10 different factors.
Yeah.
Right? So it's always an evaluative process to end up with a step. What do we do next in a therapeutic situation? I don't know, but this is the way we're going to move forward and see what happens, right? Because the context evolves as we work in it. Hegel, the concept, the thing evolves as we work in it, and changes, and other things become possible and exposed. So the final stage is really interesting, and the difference between these two is quite subtle, and it's quite a radical change. So for stage 7. Knowledge is the probabilistic outcome of a process of reasonable inquiry. Okay, so we've moved from investigation to a meta view of the process of inquiry. So we evaluate knowledge not in terms of what we know and how well it fits the evidence, but in terms of the process of inquiry that has happened in order to from which this assertion or this construction of reality emerges, right? So a lousy process is not going to give rise to usable knowledge. It may be very attractive, but if the process is shot, if the process is shot, then we get crap out of it. You get garbage out of a garbage truck. You don't know what you put into it. Yeah, right? So. And then we get into the evaluation, and the evaluation again is in terms of those meta characteristics. How reasonable is the process by which these things are emerging, by which these assertions are emerging?
I have one, and I'm not sure how significant this discomfort is. I worry about, I saw it leading in this direction, and this stage 7 confirms this, that this is very scientific. This is the model of scientific inquiry is being taken as a given for the search for truth. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
Well, it would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see if that's how it happened, or how this emerged out of the other thing. Because you can go to. What we have there is a process of reasonable inquiry. Now, if you follow Wilber's thinking, then what constitutes a process of reasonable inquiry differs from methodology and from knowledge domain to knowledge domain, right? So, I mean, Wilber himself is radically empirical, but he allows the definition of what is empirical to emerge from each domain of investigation. So yes, I mean, this sounds very much like science. However, it also sounds like stuff that we're familiar with in the development of the practices in Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, right? So how is this thing working? Does it hang together?
But wouldn't a broader conceptualization of the term science be inquiry into?
Yeah, my problem is that I think we can, for our purposes, we can broaden the term science, and I think that that's all to the good. What worries me about this, and like I said, I'm not sure how significant this worry is that this is a very specifically scientific methodology that we conduct an inquiry, we construct a solution, we evaluate it in terms of reasonable or probable evidence, and we reevaluate it when there is new evidence, perspective, or tools of inquiry available. That's the scientific method. And to reduce all knowledge to that, I think there's at least a risk there. I don't know how dangerous that risk is.
Do you have an off-the-cuff example of a kind of knowledge that makes that problematic?
Initiatory knowledge. Where, so for example, I'm just to take something very, very simple, I'm going to become a member of a fraternity.
Right.
I can learn about the history, I can learn about the rules, I can learn about the structure, and all of those things are very, very important and are subject to this kind of inquiry. But ultimately, what the kind of knowledge that makes me a member of that fraternity is an experiential one.
Right.
That is not subject to evidentiary questioning. It is not a truth that it is a truth that is the essential unfolding of a phenomenon rather than a relationship between a phenomenon and a benchmark against which it's going to be measured. So
So the subjectivity that you're talking about, that can't be subjected to these modes of inquiry.
yeah, I don't see. Well,
No,
my first worry is that I'm not sure there's a subjectivity there.
Yeah.
No, I think
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think this
That's true.
really is very specific about public knowledge. What can we say we know? Okay.
That may help me say, okay, this worry is not as significant as I think it is.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe part of what you've just said there is, have they come to this by really analysing the way that people describe how they understand something.
Yes,
So in the
that
way
is
that
what
Kohlberg,
yes.
Asks a certain set of
Yeah,
questions,
this is
and so parsing their answers would be one way of breaking it down into these stages. But
But
yeah.
those answers are always post hoc rationalizations.
Yes,
my
absolutely.
concern there.
and they're being interpreted by scientists. So,
Yes.
but I think your
Yeah.
example is really interesting because
Yeah.
you've got, there are a couple of dimensions there. You've got the initiate's subjective knowledge, then you have the fraternity's agreement that they believe that the initiate has that subjective experience. They can't know that.
Can't know it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the agreement between them that their agreement that the initiate has had that experience is sufficient to accept the initiate as the member. Right? So it's not the initiate's knowledge that makes them qualify for membership. It's the belief of the group that
they possess that knowledge.
that knowledge.
Based
That
on
they've gone through that experience.
based on their individual experiences
That
and whatever
they've
it is
got-
Right,
they
exactly.
communicate
based,
about.
based
Exactly.
on common and rare aesthetic experiences,
Yes.
to quote Nietzsche
Yeah.
there, which is this wonderful turn of phrase, which is common and rare aesthetic experiences.
Yes.
And so I think when we're talking about aesthetic knowledge, and this is Tim takes a piss out of me for this. He's okay, so well, of course you say that. You're a continental philosopher. That's it. And he's not wrong. And there is a kind of allergy that's sort of built into the way that I was trained and the kind of work that I do, that just sort of immediately, responds to this. And so that's why I worry about how much of my discomfiture is just a discomfiture with a linguistic structure that I've seen before. But I think putting it into the popular or the political or the public sphere makes a big difference, because then it becomes less a question of knowledge and more a question of testimony. It becomes a way that we share knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that,
yes.
I think,
Which is the key concern of science.
which is rightly the key concern of science. And so
And rightly
that's
not the key concern of fraternal organisations.
exactly. So that's
No, because the sharing it's only that the sharing stays within that organization, right?
I'm
So, yeah.
making a joke about
I know,
it.
yeah.
it's so I think putting it into that sphere solves sort of 90% of those problems.
Okay.
So thank
Interesting.
you.
So we're at 250.
Okay. So welcome back, everybody. We're moving from theory to the awful area, the awful messy area of reality. So, we've talked about 4 different ways of looking at people's behavior, and particularly people's behavior around spirituality. And, as Stuart and I were saying here, if you're going to help somebody and help somebody grow in their spirituality, then it's really useful to have a picture of, these 4 frameworks, which give you different perspectives on which to look at the person, and then to come up with some idea of which of these frameworks is the most useful for this particular person. Right? Is this a developmental thing? Is it purely something that can be addressed in the terms of the spiritual tradition that we're working in? Is it perhaps appropriately used with or addressed with minor psychological interventions, or are we looking at really serious stuff here, which, for the person's own safety and the safety of the people around them, may need medical intervention, what we call now medical intervention. So this last bit is to try and give us some idea of how to differentiate between that. But Elliot Ingersoll's questionnaire sounds like it would be a really useful thing to do, thing to use, if you can get the person to sit still for a questionnaire, of course, which in itself can be problematic. So let's talk about what to look for in folks if we want to try and differentiate developmental, spiritual, psychological, psychopathic, pathological aspects of behavior. Well, the number one thing to look for is the amount of emotional investment that the person has in, and I put being spiritual here. It could be anything. It could be being spiritual as a whole. It could be being a member of your church. It could be particular practices. It could be anything that we've talked about here, right? So how emotionally invested are they in it? Can you see tension in them physically? Can you see anxiety, or are they looking flaccidity I have up there? Are they looking for the ultimate theater in which they can surrender, for example? And we look, we're judging this through voice, attitude, posture, and what they say, what they're prepared to hear, what they're not prepared to hear, and 100 other things like that, right? So how frantic are they about it, and how disappointed would they be not to be part of the church? Would they, all sorts of things. Getting more specific.
Specifics.
Say it again?
I'm just thinking of specific people, and it's just sort of sending me into a spin,
Right.
and just I've got a parishioner for whom, you know, being a member of the AJC is, I mean, she's begun to structure her whole identity around
Raison
that.
d'être.
And yeah, very much so. And it's a little disconcerting. So.
Mhm.
Mm.
Right, that's, yeah.
I was going to crack off. It's about time somebody other than me did that.
Yeah, no kidding. Huh?
Maybe we can have a chat later. Do they regard you, the tradition, the literature, as human products, or do they regard them as perfect? Now, I've put that in there, and I don't know how you guys regard your literature, but there you go.
Well, Sean, you've got, I think, the perfect answer to the question: do you take the scripture
Literally or figuratively, we take it seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I shamelessly stole from somebody who shamelessly stole it from somebody else, I'm sure.
Excellent. A real teller is what comes first for this person: humane treatment of the people around them and themselves, or the purity of the practice or the person. Right. So, sorry, Sean. How hard are they driving themselves? Right. You know, how hard are they driving themselves? Again, you know, it comes down to the emotion that's in there behind this stuff. How do they regard those aliens outside the church? Right. So is how do they regard the subhuman monsters who don't belong to the church? Are they compassionate towards them? All that good stuff.
We only eat them on Fridays.
Excellent. That's good. And how do they regard their own personal failings? Even we're not talking necessarily failings as defined spiritually, but personal failings. Can they own them, right? Or do they deny them? Are they catastrophes for the person and signs of deep unworthiness? You know, we're back to our narcissism, our inverted narcissism there. And I've got vice versa, of course, there. So, how do they regard their successes? Are they triumphs of the spirit, or do they have what Stephen Batchelor calls overall a measure of ironic self-regard? So it's a complex way of saying they don't take themselves seriously. So, and they're
He's a
able,
secular Buddhist, for those of you who haven't heard of him.
yeah, not taking oneself seriously, understanding that failure happens, understanding that success is temporary and always partial. How threatening would those ideas be to particular people or to ourselves? So yes, I've been saying this, phrasing these as being about them, those plebs out there. It's really useful to apply this to ourselves as well. It's another dimension of working with shadow, to try and take an unsentimental and sometimes unsympathetic look at ourselves. It's good for the soul. Okay, so that's basically around what we're looking for. We're looking for intensity of emotion, disregard of other people, or disregard of other beings in general, and over-idealization.